us. It's super excited to get started. So again, as folks are joining the call, let's go ahead and get started. So tonight is really going to be focused on budget advocacy. And so for folks who are really connected to the political space in New York, you might know that right now all eyes are really focused on what's happening in Albany and with the state budget. But even if you're newer to that, we really want to make sure that you understand the choices that are being made both in Albany and for New York City residents out in City Hall, so that you as a young person feel like you can participate in this process. Because at the end of the day, these are our resources, these are our priorities, and we have the power to mobilize and make sure our voices are shaping the process. Tonight, we hope you can leave with the tools that you need to really be able to do some of that advocacy. And we're going to be joined by our amazing partners at NYPIRG, who are great at budget advocacy. So super excited to hear from them later on about some of their long-running work on making sure that student voices are heard in the process. And so again, I know folks are already doing this in the chat, but it's always great to see where folks are calling in from. So if you don't mind, just put your name, your pronouns, and where you're joining in from tonight, just to get a sense of who's in the room as we start letting folks in. So going ahead, seeing some folks in here. Hi, Michael. Good to see you. We love Queens College representing. Looks like we always have also have some folks from Hunter, Suny Cortland. We've got some folks in the Boogeytown Bronx. That's great. We love to hear it. Feel free to keep them coming in. Maggie, good to see you. Ricky from Staten Island. It's nice to have you here tonight. Lily's here from Manhattan. Great to see it. I can't keep up with the chat, but just know that we're really excited to have you here. And again, thanks for joining us. So as more folks fill in and let us know what's going on, let's go ahead and start things off with a quick poll. So I'm going to launch a poll in a minute here. We'll see how advanced my Zoom skills are. But we really just want to get a sense of how familiar you are with the city and state budget process. Again, there are no right or wrong answers here. Whatever experience you have is totally okay. But we're just curious. And again, that can help us shape the conversation tonight. So the poll is now launched. You should be able to see it on your screen. And I'll let folks know the results soon enough. And if you haven't already, if you wouldn't mind just making sure that you're on mute right now, that'll help us keep things moving. So I'm seeing we're about 62% way there. Let's prove to folks that youth turnout and voting is high. Let's get it to 100%. So I'll give folks another couple of minutes to fill out the poll. Great, and so I see we're almost at 100% with the poll right now. We're up to 85, but it looks like there's a good mix of folks in here with different ranges of experience. So about 26% of us are not at all familiar with the city and state budget process. Hopefully we get that up a little bit throughout the call. We have a couple of folks who are somewhere in the middle, about 33% are somewhat familiar. And then we do have some folks with some experience here. So about 25% know a little bit about it, are somewhat familiar. And then we've got another 4% who know this very well. So for that 4%, I might be calling on you for some of your expertise, but it's really great to see where folks are at in the room. And again, hopefully we can get some of these numbers up by the end of the call. So thanks for letting us know. So with that, we're going to go ahead and just walk through tonight's agenda. So what are we going to be talking about? Couple things. So one, we want to make sure you understand what the city and state budgets are. These are huge pieces of legislation with major impact on us. So we really want to make sure you have a sense of how big they are and what's in them and what's in them that impacts you as a young person. We also want to talk a little bit about how these budgets work, right? As residents of New York, as taxpayers, as folks, just living where we do, we have a right to understand how these budgets work. And so we really want to make sure that you understand that before tonight's over. And then one important piece is we want to talk a little bit about how the state budget impacts the city budget. One thing they don't always teach us in high school civic class is, how do these pieces then impact the cities? So we're going to talk a little bit about that to make sure you understand. And then we're going to be joined by our wonderful friends at NYPIRG. We've got Esperanza on the call today, who will be talking about some of their great work with the Tuition Assistance Program, the largest scholarship in New York, and how that's impacted in the state budget process. And then finally, it's not a YI event if we don't tell you ways, or don't let you know about ways that you can get involved afterwards. So if, by the end of this call, you're really ready to do some budget advocacy, that's great. We're going to have plenty of ways for you to tap into that by the end of the call. So let's go ahead and just dive right in then. So our first piece today is really making sure we understand just how big the New York City and state budgets are. So I won't make this a pop quiz. I'll just tell you the answer right here. But these are really, really big budgets. So the New York State budget that passed last year is $177 billion, billion with a B. And that's a budget that's larger than several countries. It's larger than several countries combined. It's a really huge number, which means there are a lot of agencies and programs and initiatives that are all funded by that. And again, these are our collective resources that are being used in that way. So $177 billion at the state level. And then at the city level, it's also a fairly large budget, $92 billion. And so again, this is another huge budget. The city alone is larger, again, than several states. And so we're really talking about a lot of money here. I don't know about you, but I will probably never see this amount of money myself in real life in my lifetime. And so again, just to give you a sense of what, how much is at stake when we're talking about these budgets. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what exactly what impacts young people of that $177 billion. And, there's a couple of things on the screen here. Really, the list could just keep going on. Again, as you can imagine, $177 billion can go towards a lot of things, but a couple of things that we want you to be aware about, right? And again, we'll be talking about this a lot more tonight, but if you're a college student in New York, how much financial aid you receive is very much shaped by the state budget. And then a lot of other things too. So, public transportation, if you live in the city, the MTA is a state budget priority. Funding for public universities, some of that funding comes from the state. Expanding healthcare to, undocumented folks and immigrants in New York. That's something that happens at the state level. Climate change programs, funding for grad students and their financial aid, protection for student loan borrowers, campus childcare, programs like Cuny ASAP, which is Cuny's free college program. All of these are just a couple of examples of what the state budget funds. And then if you think about the city budget, there's also quite a few initiatives that impact young folks. And so we have a couple on the screen here. Folks might have heard of the Summer Youth Employment Program, SYEP. That's something that gives young folks jobs over the summer and connects them with, career paths. That's funded by the city budget. We saw a lot of advocacy for that last summer, and we'll continue to see that this year. And other things like funding for some of our public community colleges in the city, so CUNY public community colleges. And then things like Citizenship Now that help immigrants gain access to citizenship in the city. And of course, a lot of eyes were on, the NYPD budget, right? And young people organizing around that last summer. And so all of these are just a few examples of how these budgets really do ultimately have a pretty big impact on young people in New York. And so we just wanted to give you an example. If there's others that you know about, we would love to see them in the chat. Feel free to add them in there. But again, just to give you some tangible ideas about what these budgets really fund. So if you can't already tell, the city and state budgets do have really major impacts on young New Yorkers, both in the short term and the long term. So short term can mean, the budget that is passed this year is going to have a direct impact on your financial aid next year. That's short term. Long term can be things like how we fund financial aid programs over time, which again, Esperanza will talk a little bit about that later. Or, again, we know that young people are really at the forefront of, the climate change movement, and the investments we make now on that at the state level are certainly long-term. So just keep that in mind. But again, historically, we know that young people are not at the table when these budget choices are being debated and when they're being negotiated. And, you know, of course, for us at Young Invincibles and with NYPIRG and other folks, we really want to make sure that, you know, that we're changing that and we're changing that paradigm. But there are challenges with that, right? It can be really difficult to find out what's going on with the state budget, much less to figure out how to influence it. You know, it's my job, right, to follow along what's happening with the state and city budget. But even that being my full-time job, it's, you know, still hard for me to figure out what's going on. Sometimes you talk with an elected official and they don't know what's going on. And so there are ways where this process can be really, you know, kind of difficult to navigate. And we want to give you some tools tonight to be able to break down some of those barriers and make sure that you have a voice. So just to, again, get a sense of what folks are thinking in this room, I'm going to ask for a little participation here. So if you have your phone or if you want to go on your computer, if you can go to slido.com and enter in the code 39859, we're going to ask you to put just a couple of ideas about what you think New York lawmakers should prioritize in this year's budget. So you can go ahead and take a picture of the QR code, or again, it's slido.com and the access code is 39859. And I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share just for a moment and we can go ahead and see what folks are putting in there. So just bear with me 1 second here. All right, so the poll is now open. And I will go ahead and share my screen one more time here. So the poll is now open. Again, you've got slido.com and the code is 39859. And you can just give us, you know, a couple ideas about things that you think the state should be funding.
Wait, we have to go on the website?
Yeah, so it's slido.com.
Okay.
And then the code is 39859. So I'm seeing some things in here already. Higher education, absolutely. Food security and housing, absolutely super important, especially now during COVID. Sorry,
got it.
You got it? And if you wouldn't mind just muting yourself, it'll keep things going. Thank you. So I'm seeing a lot for mental health. Absolutely, I think that's really urgent, especially during COVID. I'm also seeing homeless relief, community centers, climate change and sustainability, support for remote learning. Absolutely, we hear from folks all the time about the challenges of virtual learning. Seeing more for education. I'm seeing more for Medicare, higher education, absolutely. Financial aid for grad students, yes, that is something that has been cut historically. And so absolutely there's folks who want to change that. MTA, right? We know that for for several months now, we haven't had 24-hour subway service. So that's a big piece of it. Wow, it's seeing a lot of great answers in here. So thank you folks for filling that out. Feel free to add more in there, but it's really good to hear from you all about what some of some of your priorities are as we move into this budget cycle. So I'll turn off the poll for now, but again, if you see some of these bigger ones, that just means a lot of folks were agreeing on that one. So absolutely, I think certainly mental health and education come up as a clear trend in this group. So thank you for sharing that. So I'm gonna go ahead and go back to the slide deck here real quick. So again, thanks folks for filling that out, letting us know some of the pieces you're thinking about. Really helpful for us to kind of figure out, you know, what folks are really thinking about right now. We know that this is a really, really difficult time and that our budget needs to reflect that. So it's really helpful to hear from you on that. Thank you. So I think one thing that's really important to note, and even for folks who are super political, maybe it's something you missed, but the state budget for next year is being debated right now at this very second. Like, probably literally there is a Zoom call happening right now with our elected officials. And then just one little tip here. So something to keep in mind as we're having these conversations is city and state budgets are always for the year ahead, right? So we're in the year 2021, allegedly, if time still exists, but we are in the calendar year 2021, which means that when we're talking about the budget, we're talking about the budget for the year 2022. So what is the state going to spend money on in 2022? And so that is absolutely being debated right now, which again means that you have a chance to influence that process. So let's talk a little bit about what is on the line for college students in the budget this year. And again, these are just a couple of examples here, but we think it's really important that you know about these. So we'll talk more about the process in a minute here, but earlier this year in January, the governor released his proposal for what he thinks the state should spend money on in the budget this year. And so in that proposal, there were a few things that definitely raised some alarms for us and we think is important for you to know about. So I mentioned earlier Cuny ASAP. If you're not familiar with that program, it's a free college program at Cuny. If you have received that program before, let us know in the chat. But what it does is provide free tuition, textbook support, counseling, and really make sure that students are graduating from associate degree programs. And so we saw about a $2.5 million cut for that program in the budget. We also saw cuts for opportunity programs, and we'll be talking about those more later tonight, but those are scholarship programs that really make sure that young people and especially low-income students and underrepresented students are able to go to college full-time, and we see some cuts to those programs. You might have also seen this too. Included in the governor's proposed budget was a proposal to increase tuition at Cuny and Suny. And so that is, of course, something else that we are definitely concerned about. And absolutely think that this is not the time to be increasing tuition. We should be freezing tuition, not increasing it. So, that is absolutely something that's on our radar. And then if we go back to, some of the things that folks added into the poll earlier, a lot of folks said that mental health was really important. And we did not see in the budget an increase in campus mental health services. We also didn't see changes to programs supporting students experiencing homelessness. And we also didn't see, changes to make sure that, students who are transferring colleges, as folks' plans change right now, a lot's up in the air. There aren't any proposals that are really aimed at trying to increase, access for students experiencing that process. So definitely some concerns there. And, again, in a time when more and more folks are facing severe instability, we really think that cutting programs like ASAP and opportunity programs and increasing tuition is not the right move. And so we just wanted to make sure that you knew that. So we talked a little bit about what's in the budget. We talked a little bit about, what we're looking at and what, we're sort of facing this year. But I want to make sure, again, that you understand the timeline of when things are happening. So I mentioned that the budget process is happening now. And so what's on the screen right now is a calendar of the state's legislative session. And so what this means is that our elected officials, and again, we're talking about the state level. So, in US Congress, there's a House of Representatives and there's a Senate, right? New York, we have something similar. So at the state level, we have the state assembly, which is basically our version of the House. And then we have a state Senate, sort of same like the US Senate. And so these dates, this calendar right here is showing us when folks in the legislature, in the assembly, in the Senate, when they are meeting, when they are in committees, and when they are working on passing legislation. So just a quick note that obviously there's only 6 months that are up here, but these are full-time roles. But these are during these like blue days, this is when lawmakers are really focused on passing legislation, including the budget. And for the other 6 months of the year, they are still working, but they're doing town halls and events and constituent services and planning for the next legislative cycle. So just wanted to tell you a little bit about that. And so again, that's the larger calendar. But we want to make sure that we understand when they are working on the budget within that calendar. So if you take a look at the screen right here, you're going to see that same calendar with some red boxes around it. And what those red boxes mean is that's when legislators are focused on negotiating the budget. And you can think of the budget as sort of a massive, big piece of legislation. So during all of those times outlined in red, lawmakers are really singularly focused on the budget. If you wanted to try to pass a different bill that wouldn't be included in the budget, they're not going to want to talk to you then. All eyes are really focused on the budget, which must pass by April 1. Sometimes it doesn't, but generally the rule is it must pass by April 1st. And so you also see some purple outlines here. And what that means is, again, even after April 1, the budget is passed, it doesn't mean that lawmakers are done. It means that now they're focused on other legislation that they need to pass before the end of June. And so, you know, if there are certain things that you're trying to push for, different policy changes that might not require a huge investment, just because the budget's over, you might still be doing, it doesn't mean your advocacy is over. You might just be then focused on passing other bills. And so just very quickly with this is a chart from a great org that we work with, the Advocacy Institute. They're really focused on making sure that advocates have the resources they need to do advocacy in New York. And I just wanted to show you where we are in this cycle. So right now it's late February, and so we are in budget season, as you see by this orange line. And so again, folks are really focused on getting this budget passed by April 1. And then again, afterwards, folks are still going to be working on legislation. But again, all eyes right now are really on the state budget. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, but it's important to note that what happens and what passes at the state level and even at the federal level, it then ends up impacting, you know, us at the different levels of government. And so again, this is something that's not always taught in our high school civic classes. I don't know why, but that's a whole other spiral. But what's important for you to know from this is, again, if you focus on this big blue state budget box, you'll notice that what happens in April then therefore impacts the city budget. Again, this resource comes from the Advocacy Institute. Definitely recommend checking them out if you're not familiar. But again, I just want you to take away from this that what's happening at different levels of government is going to have different impacts on sort of the next level, which ultimately means it's going to impact us, it's going to impact our campus, it's going to impact our communities. So on that theme, we wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, how the governor's proposed state budget has influenced what we're seeing for the New York City budget. So again, I know folks who may have been involved in advocacy last summer, there was a ton of energy around the New York City budget, specifically around, you know, defunding NYPD and putting more money towards programs like the Summer Youth Employment Program, more money towards education, more money towards programs like Cuny ASAP. And so we know that a lot of folks got really involved with the budget at the city level, and we want to make sure you have some information about that here. So we're still sorting out what the budget will be looking like at the city level, but we do have sort of the mayor's initial plans for what he wants to do in the city budget. And again, there are a couple of cuts that are really concerning, especially right now. And so we're seeing an additional cut to the Cuny ASAP program. So I mentioned earlier, there's a state level cut. There's also a proposed cut of $10 million to that free college program. There's also another cut to programs like Tutor Corps and Apple Corps. So again, we're seeing some cuts to different programs at Cuny. And we're also seeing cuts to different city programs that support youth outside of Cuny. So there's different programs for youth who are experiencing homelessness. And we also saw a cut to some of those programs as well. And so again, this is sort of early. We won't really know what's going to be in the city budget until after the state budget passes. But these are some important things to have on your radar. And again, if you think about some of those priorities we shared earlier, funding higher education, funding mental health, making sure people have housing and food, how is that being reflected in what's being proposed here? I think that's something really important to keep in mind. So again, we're talking about, you know, the city or the state budget and then how it impacts the city budget. And so again, it can be sort of complicated to figure out who some of the key players are, who we really need to be thinking about when we're talking about the state budget and then how it impacts New York City. And so we just wanted to give you a little cheat sheet for, again, some of the really influential folks in the state budget. So again, I mentioned earlier, if you're not super familiar with New York State government, totally okay. But remember, we have a governor who's sort of our version of the president, right? And then we have the legislature, which is composed of the Senate and the Assembly. And so the governor in New York really has the most influence over the state budget. And the reason for that is he's the one who gets to propose what's in it initially. So if you think about it, it kind of makes it, you could understand why that means that he has a lot of influence, right? So he's the one who gets to propose what the budget looks like. He has, what's known as the State of the State address, where he talks about some of his priorities, and then his team releases this, huge budget talking about what all the priorities are. And so again, that came out in January. And now, again, knowing that we're in the budget season, what's really happening is he's sort of negotiating with the state legislature about, okay, what's really going to be in this? So again, he kind of gets to have the first draft of it. And then the legislature, all they really get to do is respond and say, oh, we should, I would rather cut this or move funding to this. Like it's sort of like they only get to work with what he's putting together, which is why he has so much power over it. But at the same time, the legislature does still have power. And specifically when it comes to budget negotiations, the folks who are going to have the most power here are the folks who are in charge of the state Senate and the state Assembly. So if you don't know, we have Senate Majority Leader here on the left, Andrea Stewart-Cousins. She represents parts of Yonkers. So she's sort of the team captain in the state Senate. She's the Senate Majority Leader. She has a ton of influence over what all of our senators are working on, over bills that sort of move to different committees, and about prioritizing things. So she has an important role here. Another person who has a really important role is Assembly Speaker Carl Husty. And so this is Carl Husty represents, he's up in the Bronx, and he, again, is sort of in charge of the Assembly. And so these are sort of the three folks who have the most influence over the state budget. And so even though, again, the governor has the most, these three folks are what's known as, really uncreatively, three people in a room. And I think Zeke added it into the chat, but this term used to actually be called three men in a room. And the reason for that was historically, the governor was always a man, the Senate Majority Leader was always a man, and the Assembly Speaker was always a man. And generally, they were all white people. And so one thing that has changed in recent years is now, instead of calling it three men in a room, we call it three people in a room, because as you can see, the Senate Majority Leader is a woman. And now we have more folks of color who are in these positions. So again, representation is changing in Albany, but what impact that's going to have on all of us and the programs they fund really depends on the type of advocacy that we do, right? It's not enough to just get folks elected. It's sort of our job to make sure that we're putting pressure on them and to make sure that they know what some of our priorities are. So when we talk about the budget, these are going to be some of the three most important people. And really, it's important to make sure that our elected officials are putting pressure on their leaders to say, hey, it's really important to fund Cuny ASAP. We need to make sure we have that in there. Or, hey, it's really important that we put funding in to help with mental health care on campus. And so these are some of the really critical folks on those issues. So again, I know I've given you a lot of information. I've talked a lot during this hour already, but I hope you're learning more about this process. But right now, I want to hand things over to Esperanza from NYPIRG to talk to us a little bit about their advocacy for the tuition assistance program. So Esperanza, if you're able to unmute yourself, and we'll go ahead and welcome you into the room. So let me just see if I can hear you.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I think I was able to unmute myself, right?
We can hear you.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name's Esperanza. I'm a project coordinator for NIPERG. I'm currently working with students at the College of Staten Island, but I also work on our higher education campaign. And I'm really happy to meet you guys. So let's talk a little bit about TAP. Right. So first of all, what is TAP? And I'm sure many of you guys receive TAP actually. So TAP, it stands for New York State's Tuition Assistance Program. And this commits the state to aid college students, both in public and independent institutions. So TAP's max initial award initially covered free tuition to college students attending public colleges and contributed to aid students attending independent colleges and universities as well. Can I get the next slide? Great, yeah. So the TAP gap is a classic example of the governor's power over the budget, resulting in catastrophic conditions for students. Before Cuomo took office in 2011, maximum TAP awards automatically increased to match public college tuition each year. And this allowed for public universities to use their funds to keep our schools running smoothly, right? We were able to have a diversity of classes, not too many students in the room. Our escalators were probably working back then. So schools were able to keep themselves up. And we can easily view Cuomo's lack of support for public education and his influence over the budget through his implementation of the TAP gap, right? I believe the bill is the Suny 2020 bill, right? So post 2011, which is when Cuomo got elected, the state decided that tuition would be automatically raised and TAP would be handled separately. So colleges were now put on the hook when tuition outpaced max TAP awards. And so the TAP gap, yeah, you can move on. So here we can see how the TAP gap has been steadily increasing over the past 10 years. And this is causing much of the issues that we see on our campuses. As colleges are forced to pay for what the state is not handling, cuts were made elsewhere that have been widely and deeply felt by students. And students have contributed $2.5 billion to our university while state input has stagnated. So we see the impact of the TAP gap in our crumbling infrastructure, our growing class sizes, our decreased class availability, and more. Many of the issues that you are experiencing in your public universities are due to the TAP gap. And if we go to the next slide, it's just another graph where you can see the TAP gap growing and growing and growing each year. So without the voices of students, the TAP gap will continue to widen and the conditions of our schools will continue to worsen as well. And last week, during our Higher Education Action Week at NIPERG, many of our students shared their experiences trying to get an education during COVID with lawmakers in lobby meetings. And you too can contact your lawmakers and contact your representatives. Hell, you could call Cuomo if you want. So I strongly urge you to contact your representatives. Call your representatives after this event using the scripts that we provided in a few slides down. And let them know that investing in our schools is investing in our generation, it's investing in the economy, and it's also investing in the future of our state. Yeah, that's all I got.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Esperanza, for doing the quick and dirty of the TAP gap in like record time. I feel like you nailed that in like 4 minutes or something like that. So that was really great. But thank you for sharing. And again, I think so much of what you raised right with that is super relevant right now. I mean, how many of us are, in classrooms that are, even on Zoom are more and more people are joining them, or, I've talked to different students who said, I'm nervous about my school reopening because there was never enough soap and hot water in our bathrooms at school, or that there wasn't enough ventilation in our old campus buildings. And so I think what you're talking about, especially with the TAP gap, is, always relevant, but like when we're talking about reopening safely, it's even more relevant than ever. So I really appreciate you.
Yeah.
Oh, go
I
ahead.
always tell students about when I was a student at City College, our infrastructure was so bad. It would literally rain on the second floor of an 8-story building. And if you're a City College student, you might have heard of the infamous raccoon that got into our school library. It's a really big problem, and I'm sure you've experienced it as well.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Esperanza. I mean, that's ridiculous. I've heard from students at Hunter College who've talked about rats running across the campus floor, and so we know that this is really real. And it's even more urgent now than ever to make sure that we are fighting for the resources that we need to really make sure that we're changing this. So we'll talk more. Esperanza provided a really great script that we'll be showing you all later on in the call. And we'll also be sharing out links to all of this after the call. So you'll have what you need to, again, start making some of those calls. So thanks, Esperanza. We'll talk a little bit about that script in a minute here. So again, if you can't tell, big theme of the night is that there's still time for college students to weigh in on the state and city budget. I actually, before I get into the next slide, I did see a hand raised from Marisa. Just wanted to make sure, was there anything you wanted to add there, Marisa?
Me?
Yeah, I saw that you had raised your hand.
Oh, I think that was an accident. Sorry.
Okay, cool.
You're doing a great job.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks. Love to have some support. So anyways, as I was saying, there's still time for students to weigh in on the state and city budget. And we really hope you take the opportunity to do so. So a couple of things. And Marisa, actually, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to have I have some links at the bottom of one of the slides here. And so if you want to drop some of those into the chat, that would be helpful. I'll let you know which slide. So again, how can students get engaged in budget advocacy this year? We have a couple of different options for you. And Marisa, some of the links are going to be at the bottom of this slide in the slide deck, so in the notes section. So a couple of things we want you to keep in mind. One, and we'll talk about this in a second, but make sure you know who your senator and your state assembly member are. I mean, I'll skip ahead here. Let me see if I've got the link. Yep. So I'm a total dork, and I literally have all of my representatives on my fridge at any given point. And, again, these are the folks that represent me. I'm paying their salary. And when I'm seeing issues in my community, I want to make sure they hear from me. And so, again, we'll send you some links to make sure you know who your state representatives are. But if you want to be a dork like me and put this information on your fridge, you can do that, and make it that much easier for you and your roommates or family to contact your elected officials. So little nerd shout out there. But again, get to know some of these folks and let them know what you need to see in the state budget. And you can do that by phone, by email. And I'll make a quick shout out here. If you're on Twitter, local elected officials are super responsive to Twitter. And some folks might have some ideas about that in the chat. But again, this is a way that you can start holding them accountable. And again, earlier on the call, we talked about how important it is to put pressure on those 3 people in a room. Again, not 3 men anymore, so we'll give that. But it's really important to put some pressure on Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, Assembly Speaker Carl Husty, and Governor Cuomo, because again, these are folks who are going to have a lot of influence on the budget. And again, following organizations like Young Invincibles and NYPIRG, the Cuny Rising Alliance, on social media to stay up to date on virtual advocacy. Again, it can be really tricky to figure out what's going on with the state legislature, which is a problem. These bodies should be much more transparent, but sometimes it's hard to find out. And so, find some trusted sources to make sure you understand what's going on. We'll also drop a link into the chat about joining the Cuny Rising Alliance. And so we are recruiting students now to join for Cuny students. We're recruiting you now to join our campaign for a New Deal for Cuny. If you haven't heard about that, this is new state legislation sponsored by Senator Gennardis in the state Senate and Assemblymember Reyes in the state assembly. And the big important thing for you to know about the New Deal for Cuny is that it is a plan to make Cuny free once again. Cuny has already been free, It can be again. It was free up until the 1970s. And so we are joining in coalition with some folks to push for free Cuny, to push for more faculty members, to push for more mental health counselors, and to make improvements to the buildings that we know folks are going to need more than ever. And so we'll put a link into the chat. You can join the movement to pass the New Deal for Cuny, which is really a huge change from sort of what Esperanza outlined before. We're talking about not just one bill, but really changing how we think about funding public higher ed like Cuny. And, can we move from, the normal sort of cutting higher ed budgets, making students take out more loans, all of those issues that we've seen over the last decade? Or can we, do what we've already done and what other countries do, which is provide free higher education to everybody? So again, you can get involved in that. And then if you did like today and you feel really motivated and are ready to talk to elected officials, we have some good news for you. You can join our advocacy day. So on Tuesday, March 16th, 2021, I guess I didn't have to say the year, but clearly I need to remind myself often, we will be having our second annual Advocacy Day in Albany. And so we won't be going up to Albany, it'll be on Zoom, but you can come, RSVP, it's free. We'll train you on how to talk with legislators. You'll meet with other student advocates. You'll get to know some new folks and, be really advocating for what you and your communities need. So we think it's a really, unique opportunity. We know our colleagues at NYPIRG were just up in the virtual Capitol doing some advocacy as well. So we would love to, make sure more student voices are there. And if you're interested, sign up, tell a friend, we know Zoom fatigue is real, but this is, these are Zoom meetings that could really have major impacts on, millions of New York students. So we hope to see you there. So we'll drop some links to that in the chat. And actually, I wanted to hand it over to Esperanza real quick to just talk a little bit about this slide here.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, really one of the best things that you can do, and one of the easiest things you can do, is just call your representatives really quick and make sure that they're supporting New Deal for Cuny. Make sure that they're not supporting budget cuts to Cuny and tuition hikes. So I'm going to ask that everybody right now take a little screenshot of this slide. Let me know in the chat once you screenshotted the slide, or you can take a picture with your phone like Melanie. I love that. So yeah, take a picture of this slide and then call your representatives as soon as you get off this event. It will really make a difference. We're going to be calling our representatives every Wednesday until the budget's passed. So yeah, please take some time. Who got the screenshot?
Let us know in the chat who's got the screenshot. We're ready to make some calls. So thank you, Esperanza. And again, for folks who don't have the screenshot or the photo, we'll be sending more information about this around afterwards. It looks like Gabrielle's got it, Randeep's got it, Josh has got it, Tyrese, Marissa. Awesome. We've got more folks who's got it. So again, we're hoping that you can make some calls and really help us, make sure that we don't have, that students get what they deserve, I think is the easiest way to say it. And so real quickly, I know we've talked a lot about elected officials tonight. So if there's another thing you want to take a screenshot of, it might be this screen. And this is finding out who your elected officials are. Again, I showed you my sort of nerdy fridge with like my list of elected officials. That didn't come out of thin air. It came out of from me like doing some Googling. And so again, we know in this last year, folks talked about how important it is to be involved in, sort of these federal level elections and how big it was. But we think it's really important for you to also get to know some of your state elected officials. So we have two resources on the screen right now that'll show you who some of your elected officials are. So again, just become familiar with these folks and get to know them, follow them on Twitter. Again, these are great avenues to be able to do some advocacy. So wanted to share that again. And again, we can put some links there in the chat. My fridge, I hope you really enjoy that image. Again, my fridge is probably, it's a work of art. And so before we close out, I just want to see how folks are feeling after tonight's session. I know we went over a lot here, but I'm going to go ahead and just launch a quick poll to see how folks are feeling now about the budget process. So we've talked, we've talked about Cuomo, we've talked about, 3 people in a room, we've talked about how it impacts the city budget. We've talked a lot in the last hour or so, and so we just want to get a sense of how folks are feeling now that they've talked a little bit about this tonight. So we'll give folks another minute or two to fill out the poll. We're about at 70%, so if you haven't clicked on one yet, please do. 75. Wow, it's very exciting for me to see this in real time, so thanks for entertaining me. We're about at 80. Let's see if we can get it to 100, 82. People taking their time to fill it out. That's okay. I'm appreciating how thoughtful your responses are to it. So thank you again.
I really am having the time of my life watching this poll come in.
Me too. I'm glad it's not just me. It's clearly the most important poll results any of us will see this year. So So I'm feeling pretty good because we started off the call with about a quarter of the room having no familiarity at all with the state process, and now 0% on that one, so feeling good. We have a couple of folks who are saying they're still somewhat unfamiliar, about 6% there, one person a little undecided, totally, but look at the growth here on folks feeling much more familiar with it. So again, really exciting to see these results. I'll go ahead and end the poll now. And so you're seeing right now the results of it. So it looks like the majority of folks feel very familiar with the city and state process. So, hey, we love to hear it. Again, we love to see some of that learning happening. And so if you like tonight, if you want to learn more about these things, I really highly encourage you to, again, sign up for our advocacy day. There's going to be more trainings along the way. We're going to dive all into how you can talk to an elected official. We're going to talk about, what it's like to be in some of these meetings. We're going to talk about how you can strategize. And you're going to learn a lot more about this process. So if you liked what you learned tonight, we hope you stay involved with some of the work because there's much more to come there. So again, thanks again for taking that poll. One thing before we go, I know we're sort of at time here. And so if folks want to ask any questions that they have, we have a couple of minutes left. And so feel free to put it in the chat. But I did get one question earlier in the Google form about how folks can find out what's in the state or city budget. So I just wanted to show you really quickly how you can actually find that out. The short answer is it's complicated. And again, we've talked a little bit about how budgets are sort of giant pieces of legislation, and that's again, the reality here. And so when we talk about finding out what's in the budget, finding out what's in ASAP, what it really means is going to the budget website, which is budget.newyork.gov, and starting to look at some of the legislation there and literally doing Control F and looking for different things. I literally just go, Control F, City University of New York, Control F, State University of New York, Control F, Cuny ASAP, and I look for it. And you look through these really, really long documents. Again, if that doesn't sound fun to you, that's probably because you're someone who values your own time. So congratulations. But I think the big thing to take away here is that that's not a very transparent process either, right? Our government should be much more responsive and make this information easier to figure out. And so my biggest tip to you is if, doing Control F for hours doesn't sound really fun, I think that's the importance of working in coalition with others, because these are the folks who are going to be able to help you figure out what's in the budget. So if you're a CUNY student and you want to be finding out more about that, join the CUNY Rising Alliance. It's a group of different organizations who are all putting their collective resources to figure out what's in the budget. So, again, that's one of the great reasons to work with other folks, right? Because we know that people power is important, and people power also makes sure that we have the information we need to run smart campaigns. And so I can't emphasize enough that if you want to find out what's in the budget, one really great place to do that is by connecting with other advocates who are going to be able to help you figure it out. But a little pro tip is there's actually something that's known as the yellow book and the blue book, which are two documents, and I'll show you what they look like on the next screen. And these are basically the Assembly and the Senate puts out an analysis of what they see in the budget. So when I'm talking about that Control F life, these are folks whose job it is to go through with a fine-tooth comb, really figure out what's in the budget, and then they present it to the Assembly and to the Senate. And so just as a quick tip, if you, again, are sort of feeling overwhelmed and not sure where to go, these books can be really, really helpful to find out information about, what's in the budget and what's not. So I just wanted to recommend that really quickly. And I'm going to take a look at the chat, see if anyone has any additional questions. Marissa put the links to the yellow book and the blue book in the chat. Thank you, thank you. And yeah, that's what I have for you tonight. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to stay on the line here. We have 3 more minutes, so if you have questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, again, we really appreciate you coming out tonight. This session will be recorded. We'll be sending out lots of links to you afterwards. So Maggie, yes, we will be sending links and resources via the email. So keep an eye out for that. That'll come to you later this week. But again, thank you everybody for joining tonight. Please join us for Advocacy Day. And we hope to see you soon. And have a great night. And thanks, Esperanza. Thanks, NIPERG. Thanks, everybody.
Hey.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Honestly, just woke up from a nap, so sorry about all this.
That's kind of what's happening here.
Yeah. So I'm in the Suny Student Assembly, and I was wondering how we can help.
Great question. So what SUNY campus are you at?
I personally go to SUNY Empire. A lot of students in the organization go to SUNY Albany, Binghamton, Buffalo, Stony Brook. Honestly, it's really a wide range of people from everywhere in SUNY.
Totally. So I'm going to give you my email. And I would love if you wanted to connect, if you just want to send me an email, let's set up a phone call and see some of the ways that we can work together.
Absolutely. I'll bring in the president of it also, because he's always very interested in collaborating. Absolutely. And doing whatever we can to contribute to all of our goals.
That'd be great.
Gabrielle, it's great to see you.
Hi, it's great to see you again too. I ended up low-key jumping into a conversation that I wasn't really supposed to jump into when we were lobbying.
You really killed it though. You really put your foot on his neck. It was awesome.
This guy started talking about his wife and kids, and I was just like, why?
Yeah, we were lobbying, it feels like a week ago was 10 years ago. But we were lobbying one of the Staten Island representatives, Lance